I didn't mean to hear it. I was just walking past his study, holding the tray with his evening tea, like I always did. But the door wasn't closed all the way. I paused when I heard my name. "Don't worry," he said, voice low and amused. "She's just temporary. You're the one I'll always come back to." There was silence on the other end, followed by a soft, feminine laugh. I didn't move, not even when the cup burned my fingers. My body froze. My heart? It didn't break. It stopped. I walked away, placed the tea on his desk, and kissed him goodnight. He smiled like he hadn't just buried me. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, realizing I had never been loved, just used. I died weeks later. No illness, no accident, just exhaustion from pretending I mattered. But fate gave me something better than justice. It gave me a restart. And this time, I wasn't asking to stay. I was leaving first. The clock blinked 6:42 a.m. when I opened my eyes again. Same bed, same sunlight, same damn scent of his cologne on my pillow. But everything was different, because I had seen the end. I knew where loving him led, and I wasn't going back. I checked the calendar. 2 years before the engagement, before the wedding, before I traded my soul for his approval. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with freedom. I had a second chance. And this time, I wasn't going to be the kind, loyal girl who begged for permanence. No, I'd become the woman he couldn't touch, the one he'd regret underestimating until his last breath. I rose from bed, heart sharp, spine tall. I smiled. Let the game begin. The first thing I did was stop calling him. I didn't message, didn't linger, didn't perform the daily routines that once made me seem devoted. Let him notice the silence. Let him wonder. When he finally reached out 2 days later with a casual, "Busy lately?" I replied, "Yes." That was it. No emoji. No warmth. Just a wall. He didn't like that. Men like him don't fall for women. They fall for control. And when you take away their leash, they panic. Good. Let him sweat. While he waited for my attention, I was already making plans. I pulled out the old journal I'd once used for wedding checklists. This time, I filled it with goals. Mine. Financial, physical, emotional. I wasn't becoming cold. I was becoming whole. I began showing up at business networking events I used to avoid. Not as someone's fiancé, just as me. The room didn't shift when I entered. Not yet. But I stood straighter anyway. I listened more than I spoke, observed the power dynamics, learned what made people lean in. I stopped trying to be liked and focused on being valuable. I signed up for an online investing course that night, not because I wanted to be rich, but because I refused to die broke in love again. My days were quiet. My nights, focused. My heart, off limits. At a charity event a week later, I bumped into him. He hadn't seen me in over a year in this life. "You look different," he said. "I am," I replied. "Better?" he asked with a smirk. I tilted my head, unbothered. His smile twitched. That's the moment I knew. He could already feel the shift. I wasn't trying to impress him anymore. I wasn't trying at all. And that was the beginning of his undoing, because nothing scares a man like the woman who once cried for him walking away without looking back. He tried harder after that. Little messages, old inside jokes. I replied politely, briefly. I gave him nothing. My silence was louder than any scream. Meanwhile, I was working late nights, designing a brand from scratch. I didn't need loans. I used the savings I had protected the first time, now reinvested smartly. I didn't post about it. I didn't announce. I built. And every milestone I reached in private made me less interested in public validation. I wasn't chasing love. I was chasing my own becoming. And he kept circling, but I kept rising. His friends started reaching out again. "He talks about you a lot," one said. I shrugged. "He used to talk about me to someone else too, remember?" That shut them up. I wasn't bitter. I was awake. The version of me who blushed at compliments, who over-explained her silence, who cooked his favorite meals hoping he'd say thank you, she was gone. In her place stood someone sharper, someone who didn't kneel, someone who was building an empire from the ashes of his arrogance. I launched the beta version of my first app 6 months later. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. And people noticed. Quiet investors reached out. Other women, mostly underestimated ones, offered their support. I built a team from the kind of women men like him ignore. Efficient, brilliant, unbothered by flattery. Together, we built something clean, scalable, ours. And every day I showed up to that office. I did it for the girl who once cried herself to sleep beside a man who said she was just temporary. That girl didn't die. She evolved. I heard he had broken up with someone, the ex he used to call the real one. I didn't react. I didn't even pause. Because when you stop waiting for karma, you realize the best revenge is irrelevance. He hadn't just lost me. He had lost access to the version of me, whoever wanted him. And that kind of loss doesn't echo. It hollows. He tried to follow me online. I blocked him. He sent an email. I archived it. The past doesn't deserve a seat in your future, especially not one it tried to burn down. The night I signed the contract that would triple my company's value, I went home and lit a candle. No celebration, no champagne, just silence, just a deep, full breath. Because I had done it, not with rage, not with begging, but with focus. And in that moment, I didn't think of him. I thought of her, the version of me who once stood in the hallway, holding a tray of tea, hearing the words that killed her spirit. She's just temporary. And I whispered, not anymore. He invited me to lunch just to catch up. I accepted, but on my terms, neutral location, broad daylight. I arrived 10 minutes late and didn't apologize. He smiled like we were old friends. I've missed this, he said. I looked around the crowded cafe. What exactly did you miss? My silence or my sacrifice? His smile faded. You're colder now. I leaned in slightly. No, just clearer. He tried to laugh it off, but I wasn't here for his comfort. I wanted him to feel what I once drowned in insignificance. I paid for my own meal, didn't thank him, didn't look back. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was just finally done saving him from his own reflection. Behind the scenes, I expanded the team. Women from different industries, tech, finance, marketing, all of them brilliant, all of them once overlooked. We moved like a quiet army. I didn't name the company after myself. I didn't need to. It wasn't about ego, it was about impact. I had watched too many men build legacies off the backs of women they disrespected. I wasn't just going to rise. I was going to make sure no one like me ever had to rise alone again. We didn't pitch perfection. We delivered results. Every success made my silence heavier, sharper, and every time he saw my name in another headline, I knew he felt it. The absence of what he could have had. Cassandra, his former flame, the one he once called the one, tried to reconnect with me. She messaged me saying she understood now. I didn't reply, not out of pettiness, but because I wasn't interested in trauma bonding. I wasn't building a museum for my past. I was building a future. People like her, they only reach out when they're drowning. But I wasn't a lifeboat. I was an island, built strong, unmoved by tides. If she wanted to heal, good. But she'd have to do it without me. I wasn't playing support in a rerun. I had my own show now. My mother called me after seeing one of my interviews. Her voice cracked. You look so strong, she said. You always were. We just didn't see it. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I didn't see it either, Mama, until I stopped waiting for someone else to. That night, I looked at my reflection for a long time, not to check flaws, not to fix anything, just to witness the woman who survived being disposable and refused to stay that way. My scars weren't visible, but I carried them with pride. Proof that I had bled. Yes, but I had bled forward. He started appearing more. At events, in mutual circles, on accidental run-ins. Once, I found him standing outside my office building. "I miss what we had," he said. I tilted my head. Which part? The pretending? Or the betrayal? He looked pained. "You don't even hate me." I smiled. "You're not worth hate. Just distance. That's the thing they never understand. When you truly heal, you don't need revenge. You just need space. And when you finally take up your own, they suffocate in the vacuum where your silence used to be." We secured our series of funding faster than predicted. Investors believed in us not because of buzz, but because of results. I hosted our first major launch party in a quiet rooftop venue. No press, no excess, just the team, just the work. As I stood in front of the room to thank everyone, I didn't prepare a speech. I just said, "They call me temporary. You made me permanent. Thank you." That line traveled, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. And it wasn't just about me. It was about every woman who had ever been labeled phase instead of future. A girl from my university reached out. She remembered how I used to carry his books, cook for him after class, skip events to wait for his calls. "You were like a wife before the wedding," she said. I laughed. I was like a fool before the awakening. She asked if I regretted it. I paused. No, because if I hadn't been her, I wouldn't have become this. Pain is a teacher, and while I'd never romanticize it, I'd never erase it either. That version of me may have died, but she left behind blueprints for my rebirth. My father, who once doubted my career path, sent me a small handwritten note. "I was wrong. You didn't follow the rules. You rewrote them. Proud doesn't begin to cover it." I cried in my office that day, quietly, not because I needed his approval, but because validation from someone who once didn't believe hits different after you've already proved them wrong. I wasn't chasing anyone's praise anymore, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good to be seen. Finally, for the right things. He tried one last time. "We should get coffee. Talk about everything." I looked at the message for a full minute, then deleted it. No anger, no curiosity, just clarity. Because closure doesn't come from conversations. It comes from becoming. And I had become the woman he would never forget, not because I begged, but because I disappeared. Not because I yelled, but because I replaced every piece of my pain with power. That kind of silence echoes forever. And that's when I knew I'd truly won. Not when he looked sorry, but when I no longer needed him to. My brand was finally featured in a top-tier business magazine. They asked for a quote to go alongside my profile. I gave them one sentence. I wasn't a phase. I was the foundation. It became the most shared pull quote of the month. Women reposted it with their own stories. Divorces, betrayals, demotions. All of us dismissed once. All of us reclaimed. I didn't need to tell the world who failed me. I just had to show them who I became. That's the truth they never expect. The one who disappears quietly isn't gone. She's just busy becoming unstoppable. He was losing influence. Slowly, his company had been exposed for unethical dealings. Whispers spread. Clients dropped. He still had charm, but not leverage. And charm without substance is a sinking ship. I watched from a distance, not with joy, but with detachment. Once, I would have rushed to fix it, sent support, offered comfort. Now, I just blinked, because his downfall didn't lift me. It never needed to. I had risen on my own terms. His collapse was just a shadow in the rear-view mirror of my life. I didn't swerve for it. I just kept driving. I walked into a panel, once where he was seated 2 rows back. Our eyes met. He gave me that half-smile, the one that used to undo me. I didn't return it. I simply looked through him, not to be cruel, but because he no longer existed in my story. People say closure is a conversation. I disagree. Closure is when your heart doesn't even flinch at the sight of the one who once shattered it. It's when you look at them and feel nothing, not hate, not pity, just neutrality. That's when you know you're free. One of my team members pulled me aside after a meeting. "You speak differently now," she said. "Not louder, just heavier, like you know who's listening and who's not." I smiled. I don't speak to be heard anymore. I speak to be remembered. And that was the shift. I didn't perform worthiness. I didn't over-explain. I existed fully, without apology. And the world either adjusted or got left behind. That's how I'd rebuilt everything, by refusing to shrink again. Not for men, not for bosses, not even for legacy, especially not for love. I was asked to keynote a global women's summit. 10 years ago, I couldn't get invited to brunch. Now I was speaking to thousands. I stepped on stage in a sharp black suit. No notes, just presence. I was told I was just temporary. I said, so I became the one woman he could never replace, and the one every girl like me would remember. The room stood before I even finished, but I didn't cry, because I wasn't overwhelmed. I was aligned. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the middle, and I planned to live the rest with no edits. A startup founder in the crowd approached me after the speech. "How do you not hate him?" she asked. I thought about it, because hating him would still make him central. And my life doesn't orbit around what hurt me anymore. That's the secret no one teaches us. Real power isn't in revenge. It's in removal, in shifting your focus so completely that even their name becomes weightless. I carried that wisdom like armor, not to protect me, but to remind myself I'd already survived the fire. And I came out brighter. At a networking event, someone asked what I'd do if I saw him with a new woman. "Smile and keep walking," I said. They laughed like I was joking. But I wasn't, because women like me don't compete. We exit. We evolve. We erase the idea that our value is ever up for negotiation. I didn't need to look better, love better, earn better than her. I already was better, because I stopped tying my worth to someone who once saw me as temporary furniture in his life. I wasn't a fixture anymore. I was the architect. He reached out again, this time through a mutual friend. He wants to apologize. Just a conversation. I sent a simple reply. There's no room in my life for past mistakes masquerading as closure. That friend said I was cold, but I wasn't cold. I was done. There's a difference. Cold is bitter. Done is clean. Done is the woman who doesn't need the final word, because her silence says it all. Done is peace that no apology can enhance. Done is when the old story tries to knock on your door, and you don't even get up to answer. I finally started dating again. Slowly, cautiously, but without fear. Because this time, I wasn't choosing with desperation. I was choosing from fullness. I didn't want someone to save me. I wanted someone to walk beside me. And if they couldn't, then I was fine walking alone. Because walking alone doesn't scare the woman who rebuilt herself brick by brick after being called disposable. I wasn't afraid of solitude anymore. I was afraid of shrinking, and I had made a vow, never again. He saw me once on a magazine cover. A friend of his posted a story, my face, my quote, my brand name. The caption read, "She's everywhere now." He didn't like the post. He didn't comment, but I knew he saw it. And I hoped, just for a moment, he remembered the night he called me temporary. Because I didn't just outgrow him. I outlived the version of me who ever thought he was permanent. They invited me to do a televised interview, one of the biggest networks. Prime time. I almost said no, but then I remembered. Visibility wasn't for vanity. It was for every woman still waiting to feel seen. I wore a clean white suit. No earrings. Just clarity. When the host asked, "What's the biggest myth you've shattered?" I said, that a woman Who walks away loses anything. The audience was silent, not out of boredom, but because the truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to be said out loud, once by someone who no longer flinches. A teenage girl messaged me after. He cheated, and I still begged. She wrote, "Then I saw your interview." I read that 3 times, tears stinging my eyes. Not because I was sad, because I had become what I never had growing up. Proof. Proof that it's okay to start over. That silence doesn't mean defeat. That choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's sacred. I didn't respond with advice. Just a single line. Walk away and don't look back. And in that moment, I didn't feel like a brand. I felt like home. I never wanted to be famous. I wanted to be unforgettable. The kind of woman they can't rewrite. The one who appears in conversations they try to keep polite. The one whose name reminds them of what happens when a quiet woman stops swallowing her worth. I didn't live for revenge. I lived for impact. And when I walked into rooms now, people listened not because I was loud, but because my presence carried evidence. That's what happens when you rebuild without bitterness. You don't walk in with a sword. You walk in with standards. He showed up at one of my public talks, sat near the back, didn't speak, just watched. Maybe he wanted me to notice. Maybe he wanted to feel something. But I didn't look twice. Because when a woman heals, she doesn't glance behind to see who's watching. She moves forward, unshaken. After the talk, someone asked, "How do you stay so calm with your past in the room?" I answered, "Because I'm not in that room anymore. He is." And that was the real shift. He hadn't moved on. I had transcended. I took a sabbatical, 3 months, no meetings, no media, just books, sea air, and peace. I journaled every day, not to relive pain, but to honor the woman I became. I wrote letters to the version of me who cried in silence, to the girl who thought being chosen meant being safe, to the woman who once thought love looked like sacrifice. And then I burned those pages, not in anger, in closure, because I didn't need those stories anymore. I had outlived them, and what's been outlived doesn't get to follow you home. I bought my first property abroad, on a cliff overlooking the ocean. No symbolism, just stone, salt, and sky. It wasn't about escape. It was about ownership, and not just of land, of myself. I stood barefoot on that balcony one morning, coffee in hand, hair unbrushed, and smiled at the horizon, not because I had it all figured out, but because I had finally stopped begging life to love me. I had started loving my own life. That was the real win. That was the prize no betrayal could ever touch. At a private leadership retreat, I was asked to share one piece of advice for younger women. I said, "Don't try to become unforgettable to the wrong people. Become unforgettable to yourself." They stood. Some cried. But I stayed still, because I knew what it cost to believe that message, and I knew how worth it was. When you stop measuring your value by who stays or who regrets leaving, you start building from a place so solid. Nothing can shake you, not even your past. He sent me one final letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside were 5 words. "You were never temporary. Sorry." I read it once, then tucked it inside a drawer, not as a keepsake, as evidence that even if he couldn't say it when it mattered, he knew. And knowing doesn't undo the harm, but it does prove one thing. I was always permanent, even when I didn't believe it, even when they treated me otherwise. The truth? It always circles back. And when it does, I'm no longer waiting to catch it. I've already moved on. One day, walking through an airport, I saw a little girl tugging at her mom's sleeve. "That's her," she said, "the one from the story." I bent down and asked, "What did I teach you?" She grinned. "You said if someone doesn't want you, that's their problem." I smiled. "That's exactly right." And in that moment, I saw it, that I hadn't just saved myself. I had created a ripple, one that reached little girls who hadn't even been broken yet, and made sure they never would be, because I didn't rebuild to prove him wrong. I rebuilt to prove her right. The girl I used to be, the woman I chose to become, and the future I refused to forfeit. My team surprised me with a celebration. 10 years since we launched. I didn't want a party, but they insisted. The room was filled with candles, handwritten letters from our staff, and a slideshow of our earliest moments. For women, one borrowed office and too much doubt. I stood there, overwhelmed, holding back tears. Not because I missed the struggle, but because we had done what no one expected. We'd stayed. We weren't a phase. We weren't a woman-led novelty. We were industry. And they didn't just thank me. They called me leader, not for what I built, but for how I never abandoned them. Or myself. After the party, I sat alone with the first sketch I ever drew, crumpled, imperfect, full of naive hope. I framed it, not because it was brilliant, but because it survived. Like me, sometimes the things that matter most aren't the polished wins. They're the raw beginnings, the moments no one clapped for, the drafts we almost threw away. That first sketch reminded me of the girl who believed she could matter before anyone told her she didn't. And that belief, it was the seed of everything. A rising influencer posted my quote, "You were never temporary," under her photo, giving me credit. The comments exploded. Girls tagging girls. Stories spilling out. One wrote, "I walked away from a man who called me a seat filler. I'm in law school now." Another said, "I stopped begging to be chosen. I chose myself." I read every word, not because I needed validation, but because I needed reminders. That pain, when transformed, becomes roadmap. That voice, when used, becomes lifeline. I wasn't a savior, just a mirror, a reflection of what was already possible in them, too. One of my closest team members got engaged. She asked me to be there when she picked the dress. "You taught me not to shrink," she said, "so I want to stand tall beside you." I cried in that boutique, not because of the dress, but because I had become someone's safe place. Me, the girl who used to fold herself into corners to avoid conflict. The woman who once thought love was earned through suffering. I didn't just escape that version. I turned her into light, a light that now lit the way for others. I launched a mentorship circle for young women navigating power dynamics in business. We didn't talk resumes. We talked boundaries, identity, self-worth. One girl asked, "What if no one believes in me yet?" I answered, "Then you believe in you until the world catches up." And I meant it, because belief isn't gifted. It's grown. And the most dangerous woman in any room is the one who stopped waiting to be discovered. The one who discovered herself. That's what I had done. That's what I was passing on. And the ripples kept spreading. He appeared on a panel one year, smaller conference, mostly men. Someone sent me a clip. He talked about regret and mistakes in choosing loyalty over love. I didn't watch the whole thing, because his regret didn't move me. It didn't hurt. It didn't heal. It just existed, like a forgotten echo in a hallway I no longer walked. That's how you know you're free. Not when they apologize, but when their voice doesn't reach you anymore. When the past becomes background noise. And you realize you never needed closure. You needed clarity. I visited the cafe, where we once had that awkward lunch after rebirth. Same table, same window. But this time, I was alone. I ordered my drink, opened a book, and read without checking my phone. I didn't glance around for him. I didn't compare then to now. I just sat, fully, completely, because peace isn't a moment. It's a muscle, one you build every time you choose presence over panic, silence over spectacle. And I had built it, brick by brick. Now, peace was my default. Years after the launch, a documentary featured our journey. The interviewer asked me, "What would you say to him today?" I paused, then smiled. "Nothing." She blinked. Nothing at all? I nodded, because I've said everything I needed to say by living. That answer went viral. Not because it was clever, but because every woman who's ever outgrown pain felt it. You don't always need a final scene. Sometimes you just need a life so full it leaves no room for who hurt you. And my life overflowed. I created a scholarship in my mother's name for women returning to school after broken engagements. The first recipient cried when I handed it to her. He told me I'd regret leaving. She whispered. I looked her in the eyes. He was wrong. That's the work I live for now. Not the applause. Not the headlines. The healing. The handing back. The women who say, because of you, I stopped settling. And I always say the same thing. You didn't stop because of me. You stopped because you were ready. I just reminded you. Because I was never just temporary. I was the blueprint, the warning, and the woman no one could ever replace. My name was listed on Forbes that year. Not just as a top founder, but as a woman reshaping how power looked. The write-up said, she rose not with noise, but with precision. And that was the greatest compliment of all. I hadn't screamed to be heard. I had simply stopped whispering. I stood beside men who once ignored me. I built alliances with women who once doubted themselves. And every time I signed a deal, wrote a check, or launched a new branch, I didn't feel pride. I felt responsibility. Because the legacy I was building wasn't about revenge. It was about access. For every girl told she wasn't enough. On the 10-year anniversary of our company, I visited the grave of the girl I used to be. Figuratively, of course, the park bench where I once cried after hearing his betrayal. I sat there, quiet, remembering the cold, the silence, the humiliation. And then I smiled, because I didn't pity her. I thanked her. She didn't walk away that day, but she survived. And because she did, I rose. Stronger, clearer, with boundaries like steel and love like grace. She gave me the fight. I gave her the finish. One of our interns asked me if I ever thought about marriage again. I told her, yes, but now I know love isn't a prize I earn by breaking myself. She looked surprised. So, do you still believe in it? I nodded. I believe in love that recognizes value, not demands proof of it. And that was the truth. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't guarded. I was just aware. Aware that any love not rooted in respect is just temporary attention. And I would never again live on borrowed time in someone else's story. He tried one last time. A note slipped to one of my assistants at a public event. It read, "You were always the one." She asked if I wanted to keep it. I said no, not because I was angry, but because I had outgrown even the temptation of caring. When you heal deeply, even the idea of reopening the door feels absurd. I didn't want him back. I didn't even want him sorry. I wanted nothing. And that kind of nothing, that's peace in its purest form. I started a podcast, not to talk about my journey, but to center others. Women who rebuilt after betrayal. Women who reclaimed careers, started families solo, or found their voice after silence. Each story reminded me I was never alone in this. I had just once been convinced I was, and now I'd made it impossible for any woman to think she was the only one crawling through the fire. That's the new power. Visibility. Not for ego, but for permission to rise. The word temporary became something of a joke in our office. We had mugs, shirts, even a banner in our break room that read, "Just temporary? Watch us work." Every time someone said it, we laughed, because we had turned the insult into an anthem. And there is nothing more powerful than a woman who repurposes pain. Nothing more unstoppable than a team who alchemizes disrespect into drive. We didn't fight for space anymore. We owned it. I bought the building that once housed his first office, renovated it, turned it into a women-led co-working space. When reporters asked if it was intentional, I shrugged. Sometimes justice is poetic. But really, it wasn't about him. It was about replacing what used to be a shrine to his ego with a temple of empowerment, where deals were made over tea, where ideas were born in quiet corners, where women walked in whole and left limitless. That was justice, not destruction, redirection. I no longer needed to prove anything. I wore my softness without apology. I walked into rooms with warmth, not armor. Because when you truly heal, you don't need sharp edges. You become so solid, nothing can pierce you. And softness? That's not weakness. That's mastery. It means I can be kind without being manipulated, generous without being emptied, present without being consumed. That was my real evolution. Not power, but peace. I visited my parents on a Sunday afternoon. We sat in the backyard, sunlight painting the grass gold. My mother looked at me and said, "You seem light." I smiled. "I am." And it was true. I wasn't chasing dreams. I was living them. I wasn't hiding from memories. I was honoring them. I wasn't afraid of who I had been. I was proud of her because she walked through the fire so I could live in the light. And when they ask what happened to the girl he once called temporary, I say this: she stopped waiting. She stopped begging. She remembered her worth. And once she did, she became the woman they name eras after.